Hey, today we're going to discuss what makes a good clinical trial, and we are going to discuss the various portions and components of what makes a good clinical trial, and explain how those components work towards making a good clinical trial. Um, you want a clinical trial to meet at least the following conditions: it must be prospective, it must be randomized, it must be double-blinded, it must be placebo-controlled if possible, it must be multi-center, multinational, and those are the conditions. And let's discuss each one individually. The first one would be prospective. What does that mean? It means that you don't actually go in there and look at data that was acquired previously. The reason you don't do that is because you want to make sure that that the data isn't biased in any way, that you're actually getting the right sample of people. And you do that, and prospectively, statistically, that actually helps. So you want to do a study that's statistically significant going prospectively. Another thing that you actually want to look at that isn't mentioned but it's in there is that you want to make sure it's statistically significant. What do I mean by statistically significant? There are different varieties of statistical tests that you can use. When you use these tests, what these tests do is evaluate whether, for a certain level of confidence, you can trust the results. You have to be worried about things like false positives, false negatives, and obviously negatives and positives. What you want to be worried about is that when you have false negatives, what that means is you've proven something to be true when it's actually false. And false positives is proving something to be, well, false positives is when you prove something to be true when it's not, and false negatives is when you prove something to not be true when it actually is. You need large numbers of people, so doing a 10-person study doesn't carry enough weight. It just doesn't. You can't do the statistical numbers that you need. So you want it to be prospective. You want it to be randomized. What does the word randomized mean? Randomized means you don't just take the first 10 people, walk through the door, and give them a certain drug, and then the next 10 people get another drug. There's a randomization schedule that either computers or some type of algorithm goes through so that someone who fits the criteria could either get the drug or the other arm being either a placebo or something, or a comparator drug. And the reason you do it that way is because you don't know whether the person's going to get the study drug or the actual comparator. What does double-blinded mean? Double-blinded basically means neither the subject nor the healthcare provider knows whether you're getting the drug or the placebo. Placebo-controlled. Now, depending on who you ask and which country you're doing these studies in, placebo-controlled basically means that you use a placebo as a comparator to the study drug. Several states several countries have banned the use of placebos. The U.S. is not one of those states, one of those countries, but placebo-controlled. The reason the U.S. hasn't is because in a lot of antidepressant trials, it's actually difficult to show effect unless you compare it to placebo, because the numbers you need are astronomical. Multi-center. The word multi-center basically means you can't do it in one location. So if you do the entire study in one location, you don't know if the people who came to that one location were biased somehow. So if you do a study in Beverly Hills, you might get a different result than doing it in, say, West Philadelphia. So you should be mindful of something like this. You want it to be multinational. We talked about it being multi-center, but if those centers are global in reach, what that means is you would potentially have more patients, you would potentially have greater variability of patients, and therefore you can trust the results more. And it's critical to remember, like we said, that if a study is large enough and it meets these criteria, one of these studies is often better. So let's say you do I'm making up these numbers, but let's say you do a 300-person study that is prospective, randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, multinational, multi-center. Those 300 patients in that one study is often better than 10 studies, each of 30 patients. So make sure you recognize that when you participate in a study. So we just discussed what makes a good clinical trial. I look forward to any questions you might have. Take care. Bye-bye.